Our talk this morning, no surprise, but it's a little shorter. It is, who is Ernest Holmes? So I'm going to begin by sharing some history about Ernest and to share the history of his life, but also to share with us some of the experiences that he had before we look at some of the things that he has said. So he was born Ernest Holmes, and he was born in the late 1800s. He was born on a small farm in Maine, and his parents had 9 boys. 9 boys. Ernest was the youngest of them. His mom was a school teacher, and his father was a farmer. However, he was born into poverty. They didn't have much money, and his father did not do really well with farming. Eventually, the bank foreclosed on their farm, and this began a period of time in Ernest's home for what his brothers called the nomadic life. The children were first moved into an abandoned farmhouse, and then eventually they just were pushed off onto various relatives, or taken in, I should say, pushed off, because I'm sure that they wanted them. And but 9 boys shuffled around from various relatives. When his father finally secured a logging position, the boys were reunited with their family and each other. Yet, Ernest's brothers say that Ernest never had 2 birthdays in the same house, that they were always somewhere else because they were moving around so much. So he knows what poverty is like. Key point to remember in his teaching. The entire family would just sit around and read. That was their pleasure, the thing they enjoyed doing. Ernest happened to be extremely smart, and he could repeat passages that he heard, even hearing them just once, almost word for word. Their interests lie in the fields, no surprise, of philosophy and religion. His mom read to him, and they studied Henry Drummond's Natural Law in the Spiritual World. So the boys got a variety of religious viewpoints, and much more expansive than the people up in that New England area I know, because I grew up there too. Not in the 1800s, but a little bit later. They enjoyed reading about metaphysics, no surprise. Ernest Holmes credits his mom and his dad with teaching him there is nothing to fear about religion. Nothing to fear. And his dad went so far as to say that much of what is spoken in the church is actually a lie. Jesus said, "Ye are gods." Go with that. And that is what Ernest taught. Ye are gods. As a teenager, Holmes became known as the eternal question mark. That was due to his curiosity and his constant questioning. There are many stories about him being removed from a space because he questioned just a little too much. He called himself a nonconformist. He attributes his own spiritual and philosophical understanding to what he terms the result of a natural growth and unfolding, which is an evolution available to all of us. He tried formal schooling for a while in a preparatory school in Boston when he was 18 years old, but he decided early on to become what he called a student of life instead of a student of formal education. Eventually, he moved to California, where his brother Fenwick and his mother lived. Fenwick, his brother, who he was very close to, had a position as a congregational minister, and their mother worked in the same church. Ernest became a prolific writer, as we know, and an extremely popular speaker for those days. He spoke all around the country, and eventually he created and established the science of mind and spirit, which we practice here today and is known as a part of the teachings for Center for Spiritual Living.
Well, when we decided we were going to do this talk, I thought we all pretty much know a lot about Ernest Holmes, and I thought I'm going to see if I can find some quotes that I haven't seen before. So I got online and I did find some that I hadn't seen before. But I kept coming ones that I had seen before, and I thought, well, those are really good. And I like those. And I quite often say, you know, this is my famous Ernest Holmes quote. Well, I came up with a lot of them that I just want to share. A lot of them are just like little one-liners. But Deborah and I have quite often said, we read something together and we say, wow, that's one sentence. We could do a whole talk about just that one sentence. And Ernest Holmes is quite deep sometimes, as many of his influencers. And so these are some of those ideas. And I found this one, I had not heard this before. Ernest Holmes says, teach and practice, practice and teach. That is all we have, that is all we are good for, that is all we ever ought to do. And I thought, first time I read that, I thought, wow, that sounds pretty good. Second time I read that, I thought, that's all that we ought to do? That's pretty exclusive. Teach and practice. Teach and practice. I thought that seems pretty limited. I mean, I like to watch television. I don't think that's maybe all I ought to do, but I realized maybe that's not exactly what he's saying. As a music teacher, I quite often told my students, you need to practice, you need to practice. And that always seemed like a chore that we had to do, plunk out the notes. And I came up with the idea that, you know what, practice is not going over something rudimentarily. It's putting into practice what you have learned. So I thought he could have said, learn and practice, learn and practice. That's all we ought to do. But as we practice, put things into practice, we are putting things out into the world around us, and people are seeing that and experiencing that. So therefore, we are actually teaching as well. So teach and practice, practice and teach. That is all we have. That is all we are good for. That is all we ever ought to do. I think it's more about challenging ourselves to constantly put this teaching into practice. Challenging ourselves to find the best. Be the best that we can be. And I know we're already perfect because we are God in expression, which I'm going to talk about later, but we have to sometimes challenge ourselves to remind ourselves of that truth, to create the perfection that we truly are. Ernest Holmes says, if the philosophy of Christianity were lived, wars would cease, unhappiness would cease, economic problems would be solved, poverty would be wiped from the face of the earth, and man's inhumanity to man would be transmuted into a spirit of mutual hopefulness. Well, first of all, I like the fact that he said the philosophy of Christianity. And people quite ask me, people who don't understand the science of mind ask me, what do you teach and what do you do? And I always say, I teach spiritual philosophy. I don't teach any religion. I teach spiritual philosophy. So I combine all spiritual traditions together and come up with a common truth, and I consider that to be a spiritual philosophy. That's what we teach. I think it's also interesting that Ernest Holmes said, if the philosophy of Christianity were lived, knowing the way Ernest Holmes was brought up and the way he studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and all the spiritual traditions of the earth, and combined them all together and came up with his common truths. So I think we could say, if the philosophy of Buddhism were lived, we would cease all wars and make the world a better place, and so on. We said, if the principles of, or the philosophy of any other spiritual tradition were actually followed and believed and lived, it would make a difference. And I believe that's exactly what he was doing. I believe that's exactly what he was teaching. And he said, I love this one, I thank the God that is, that the God they told about is not. We hear a lot of stuff in religion that just really doesn't make sense to us necessarily, but we're supposed to believe in faith. And if it doesn't believe, if it doesn't make sense to me, I don't know how I'm supposed to believe it. So I love that one. I think the God that is, the God they told about is not. And we're going to talk more a little bit about what the God that is really is. He says the road to freedom lies not through mysteries of occult performances, but through the intelligent use of natural forces and laws. I use that quote a lot because I really think it is the core principle of science of mind. Using intelligently natural laws and forces of the universe for our benefit. I believe the whole point of science of mind, of New Thought thinking, is mastering the use of universal law. Knowing that every thought has power, every thought is a prayer, and however we hold on to those prayerful thoughts, we imbue them with universal power to create our reality. And I believe that is the truth of what we teach, and it is simply following universal laws and principles. He says, we are bound because we are first free, and the power which binds us is the only thing in the universe which can free us. The same power used one way can create one thing, used another way can create another way. It can ensnare us in our own myriad thoughts, or it can actually free us from that. What you think about, you bring about. There's the power behind your word, and it really has an effect in your life. He says, at all times, we are either drawing things to us or pushing them away. Love that quote. What are you thinking about? Are you drawing into your existence, into your experience, negative thought ideas so that you can experience them? Or are you bringing about in your thought patterns positive things that you get to enjoy? He says each one of us is an outlet to God and an inlet to God. I love that. We're an outlet to God and an inlet to God, because we are expressing God in human form. God is actually moving through us, as us, into the world. We're using universal power at the human level, even though we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We can tend to go back and forth, the pendulum, moving back and forth, and sometimes we're more spiritual, sometimes we're more human, but the truth is we are all just God essence. We all are stardust brought into human existence. And there's a tangled hierarchy because God is all that is, and so therefore all that we are is God stuff. Sometimes we recognize that, sometimes we use it, sometimes we forget. We need to remember to know that we are all God stuff. He says, we do not save that which was lost. We merely discover that which needs to be found. That's a cool one, isn't it? I love the saying that we don't fix things. We don't fix circumstances. Once something comes into manifest form, it is there. We can release it and let it go, or we can hold on to it, or we can create something new which we wish to experience. We don't save that which was lost. We merely discover that which needs to be found. We come up with new ideas. We come up with new ideas, new thoughts, new insights, new mental equivalents for what we wish to experience, and then we bring those into manifestation. It's one of my favorite ones. Not failure, but low aim is a crime. Finding a positive prototype for that which we wish to experience and put a pin in it, zeroing in on it, knowing that sin, by definition, is missing the mark. And if you have, oh great, there's a quote that just came to mind. I can't think of who said it right now. What goes on in vagueness stays in vagueness.
You said it.
I didn't say it.
Right now you did.
I'll tell you later if I remember who said that. But what we think about in vagueness happens within our lives. We wonder why isn't things showing up the way I wish they would, because we haven't really decided. God doesn't know what's going to happen to us until we make up our minds. And so we have to be clear with our thoughts So not failure, but low aim is a crime. He says, peace fills my heart with, and life sings through me in radiant ecstasy. I just think that's so poetic. Life throws me in, through me in radiant ecstasy. He says, if a person always lived near the mind of God, he would never make any great mistakes. There we come to the idea, are there actually any mistakes? Is a mistake a real thing? And I thought, it's interesting, I wrote this down when BB said it today. Richard Bach talks about problems. Are there ever any real problems except how we look at things? If we always stayed near the mind of God, there would never be any problems or mistakes, would there? Because we always be centered, like I talked about in the beginning. Teach and practice, practice and teach, learn and practice. Stay focused. He says, oh, and I love this one. Inspiration without activation is hallucination. Inspiration without activation is hallucination. Holding positive thoughts is wonderful. Holding positive thoughts and doing nothing about it means nothing. So it's nice to think about things, but it's better to actually put them into activation. There's a great saying we use in Science of Mind: treat and move your feet. Pray about it, and then do what you need to do to make it happen, to bring it into fruition. And another one that's my favorites. We all need more backbone and less wishbone. Wishing is not a science of mind principle. Positive wishes are not science of mind ideas. Hopes are not science of mind ideas. Knowing something, having backbone, initiative behind it, and holding it as an absolute truth in our mind will bring results.
And the song that comes to mind for me is wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it? For all of us to experience all those awesome, incredible things that you and Ernest shared. Just fantastic. And I think that probably a lot of the times we're right there. What I know about Ernest is that he never stopped learning. He never stopped teaching, but he also never stopped learning. He studied the many teachings of many people throughout his life. And so let's talk about the person, the personal person that he was, because he was indeed extremely relatable. When we listen to all these beautiful sayings, we could think of him as like up on a pedestal. But in Science of Mind, we do not do that. And he did not do that for himself. He was very relatable. So in his life, he was just as normal as we are, just as regular as we are. He experienced and felt similar situations and feelings just like us. What are some of those? Well, he lived through the passing of his wife Hazel, and those around him said that he went into a 2-week time of solitude to just deal with his own feelings by himself, and that when he came out of that, he surrounded himself with his closest friends. Human feelings, the grief process that we walk through when we have a physical loss, despite our knowing of truth. It's a part of being human. And then, when the split occurred in his organization, the people that were closest to him described him as having a look of shock on his face. They said that he was very transparent, and you could always tell exactly what he was feeling and what he was thinking. And probably we can relate to that. Something occurs, and our first feeling is shock that this is the way this is unfolding. It wasn't the way we thought it was going to. He felt shocked, and he felt saddened. However, he moved on. He surrounded himself with his closest friends, and he returned to that place within him that knows and knows it knows, just like we do. we are not still stuck on the events or the problems, if we had them, from 20 years ago. At least I certainly hope not. Ernest is quoted quite a bit about his ideas and thoughts about charity and poverty. Now, I've shared with you that he experienced great poverty in his youth, so he has a lot of experience in it. And what he has to say is that all the charity on earth has never done away with poverty, nor will it. If it could have, it would have. Everyone has the same power. We would do better to show people how to use their power. And that is what this teaching is all about. Ernest Holmes did not believe he was different from others. He believed and said, "I'm as human as anyone else is." Once, when he got sick, he stated, "It is possible for anybody to forget the way. It doesn't matter how much he knows. I forgot a while back and got kind of sick, but now I'm remembering again and getting well again." It's possible for anyone to block the channels through which the living presence expresses itself. Now, it's interesting to me, I have read all this material before, I've talked about some of it before, but I got that new aha that how interesting it is to look at how his own life shaped some of his thoughts, some of his beliefs, just as our lives shape our thoughts. Now, traditionally in science of mind, we say the opposite. We say that our thoughts shape our life. And that is true. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I am also realizing through Ernest and his experience with poverty led him to strong statements that charity is not the answer, that the way is to help everyone to see that God potential within them, as them, so that they can live it and use it themselves. So, what's on your plate these days? Probably you've already been thinking about something on your plate that maybe you're looking to make a shift with. Well, I'm going to share with you mine. A while back, I received a jury summons. And since I'm working 7 days a week again, by personal desire, I requested a release from jury duty. However, I was denied. So this past week, because it was supposed to start tomorrow, Monday, this past week I had to stay late preparing lesson plans for a substitute to be able to read and understand what to do each day in each subject with each kid, and when they're out, when they're in. And it took a lot of extra work, a lot of extra planning, changes. It just so happens that this next week I had my observation with my principal, and that requires 3 different meetings on the calendar. And there are 2 big county tests that are very micromanaged and need to happen this week. Well, I got everything ready and got home by 6 when I was able to call and find out what time and where. And when I got home to find out my appointed time, I found out that I'm not needed at this time. After spending all those hours and all that time, I had one whole table with all these little piles with little notes. So, okay, now I have to call the principal to let her know maybe how she wants to change things. I have to call the substitute I had planned. I have to call the secretary that does all the paperwork for me. Okay. But I have to call this next Friday because they're changing my time. So I might have to do it all over again. So I told David, you know what? I can laugh or I can cry. And I'm going to just choose to laugh about it all. Because that laughter is going to resonate some good stuff within me, some of the good chemicals I want to release rather than the stressful ones. But I also realized that I needed a good swift kick in the behind to get out of all those negative thoughts I was having into right thinking. I love those words. I know some people don't like those words, but I do, because they don't to me mean that I've done something wrong. They mean that I know what I want to think right. So I searched for something new, something that would pop for me. And I found something called the 3-3-3 rule. Has anyone heard of it? Well, it's pretty intricate. So it goes like this, and you can do it silently for yourself. It's for reducing stress and anxiety. And so you name 3 things that you see. So I might say, beautiful friends, chairs, computer. Sorry, honey, I left you out. I should have said you too. I'll say 4. 4, 4, 4. But the next one's harder. It's name 3 sounds you hear. And quite often, wherever I am, it's dead silent. So then I have to really listen and be creative. But now my mind is on something totally different, right? Oh, I can hear the thoughts in my head. I just heard the air conditioner come on. Anybody want to sneeze or cough or anything? Because you have to wait until you have your 3 things. And then you get to move 3 body parts. Well, that's easy. Fingers, mouth, and toes. Easy. But now what has happened is that we have interrupted those present thoughts of stress and anxiety that we were feeling. It brings a focus into the now moment, a reality check, if you will. It engages our senses and calms the nervous system. It shifts attention from the internal thought system to the external environment. Again, the opposite of what we traditionally teach. Oh, go within, go to that still small voice and pray and breathe within. And I'm really good at that. But I didn't seem to be this last week. So I found this something new, and every time I would go, what do I see? What do I hear? And wiggle. Okay, I'm back again. So we can come up with these little ideas that help us, but we never want to stay stuck in the chaos of stress and anxiety. Ernest Holmes was very fond of putting it this way. Can you afford the consequences of the way you are thinking? And indeed, there were moments this past week when I did not want to afford the consequences of the way I was thinking. So shifting, finding something that shifts those thoughts. I'm going to end with a couple different quotes from him put together and leave us with these thoughts. Within us is the unborn possibility of limitless experience. Ours is the privilege of giving birth to it. Law in the universe lets you have what you want. Disaster or delight. Again, the choice is yours. And so it is.